Hello and welcome to Indus News with me, Usman Lone. Well, we begin this hour with our top story, and that's in Afghanistan, where a government official says the plan to swap 2 foreign hostages with 3 Taliban prisoners has been postponed. Taliban spokesman Zabiullah Mujahid has blamed the United States for the delay. The hostages, including 2 university professors who were kidnapped from Kabul by the Taliban 3 years ago, the deal was being seen by the Afghan government as a key move to pave the way for peace talks with the Taliban. Earlier this year, the Taliban and the United States were on the verge of a deal to establish peace in the war-torn country. But US President Donald Trump abruptly called off the talks in September earlier this year. Israel broke a ceasefire agreement yesterday by launching military strikes on Gaza. Medics say Israeli forces killed 36 Palestinians in airstrikes on Gaza this week. Israel claims the attacks are in response to rockets fired by Palestinian militants. The situation escalated after Israel killed Al-Quds Brigade commander Baha Abul al-Atta in an airstrike. Palestinian Prime Minister Mohammed Shatayeh says Israel is using the escalation to solve its own political problems. Well, staying in the Middle East and in Lebanon, former Finance Minister Mohammed Safadi has agreed to be the next Prime Minister if he wins the support of major political parties. Speaking to reporters in Beirut, Foreign Minister Gebran Basil said consultations to form the new government would begin next week. Last month, Prime Minister Assad al-Hariri resigned after weeks of protest against corruption and the economic slowdown in the country. But his resignation failed to pacify the protesters, who are demanding a complete overhaul of the Lebanese political system. Well, we have a similar scenario in Chile, where lawmakers have agreed to hold a referendum on replacing the country's constitution following weeks of anti-government protests. Demonstrators are demanding social reforms and a change to the constitution, which dates back to the era of military ruler Augusto Pinochet. The vote will take place in April next year. 20 people have been killed and over 1,000 injured during clashes with security forces since the 18th of October. And staying with South America, Bolivia's interim government and members of the party of ex-President Evo Morales have struck a deal to hold new elections. Senate President Monica Murga said the agreement was made to defend Bolivian democracy. Murga called on Bolivia's security forces to treat the country's indigenous groups with respect. Bolivia's interim president, Janine Áñez, said she wants to mend bridges with Morales' party. But she said the exiled ex-president will not be welcomed as a candidate for the presidency. Meanwhile, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has sent a personal envoy to Bolivia to offer his support for a peaceful solution. Well, closer to home now in Pakistan, where Foreign Office spokesman Mohammed Faisal says Islamabad will continue to highlight India's human rights violations in occupied Kashmir. Faisal said India's actions in Kashmir exposed its racist ideology to the world. More in this report.
As the curfew and communications blackout in Kashmir continue, Pakistan reaffirms its commitment to the Kashmir cause. Addressing a gathering of Kashmiri journalists in Islamabad, Foreign Office spokesperson Mohammed Faisal said Pakistan is ready to counter India's state terrorism in the valley. He said Pakistan will always stand by Kashmiris.
Our position on Jammu and Kashmir is consistent and it is not going to change. But the prime reason for that position is the efforts and struggle that the people in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir are making. They are writing the history in their blood.
Minister for Kashmir Affairs Ali Amin Gandapur urged the international community to intervene and help resolve the Kashmir conflict. He said if India and Pakistan go to war, the entire world will suffer. Rights activist Mashal Yasin Malik said India is committing blunders in the occupied valley.
This is a very scary situation. This is like when you sow seeds of extremism in any religion, that means that you are promoting terrorism. And already what the Indian forces are doing is the same thing.
Kashmiri journalist Tajammul Islam questions international community's silence over the killing of civilians by Indian troops. He said India has violated all UN resolutions and peace pacts signed with Pakistan by revoking Kashmir's autonomy on 5th of August 2019.
United Nations in particular, that they come forward in a big way for the implementation of UN resolutions and for holding a plebiscite in the occupied territory so that people by themselves can decide about their fate.
The restrictions imposed by India has created a shortage of food and medicines in the occupied valley, but New Delhi is constantly ignoring calls for the restoration of personal freedoms.
Well, it's not just Pakistan that's voicing its concern over Kashmir, as the United States Congress has called on India to stop violating the rights of Kashmiris and end the communications blackout in the occupied valley. Chairman of the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission, Jim McGovern, has asked India to allow foreign journalists into occupied Kashmir. Commissioner Anurima Bhargava said the freedom of Muslims is being restricted by the Indian government. Bhargava said the BJP government is pushing an ideology that suggests only a Hindu can be an Indian citizen. She said political leaders in India consider religious minorities as either inferior or not parts of India's society. The US Congressional Commissioner said India is denying healthcare to millions of people under the lockdown in occupied Kashmir. Well, the United States has also asked South Korea to pay for the cost of American forces deployed for its defense. US Secretary of Defense Mark Esper met his South Korean counterpart Jong Kyung-do in Seoul. Talking to reporters afterwards, Jong said the cost-sharing pact should be fair and mutually agreeable. Esper said it's crucial for Washington and Seoul to reach an agreement on cost-sharing for US troops.
This is a very strong alliance we have, but Korea is a wealthy country and could and should pay more to help offset the cost of defense. The only ones who benefit from expiration of JSOMIA and continued friction between Seoul and Tokyo are Pyongyang and Beijing.
In Geneva, US and Russian officials have met for talks on a new strategic arms reduction treaty. The US State Department says officials from both countries met to discuss matters to implement the treaty. The New START is the only nuclear treaty between the United States and Russia. Last week, the US repeated its desire for new multilateral nuclear arms control with Russia and China. But China says it has no interest in such an agreement. Well, Russia has called for an end to the US military's occupation of oil fields in northern Syria. Addressing the UN Security Council, Russia's permanent representative Dmitry Polansky accused the United States of looting oil from Syria. In the meantime, President Vladimir Putin told the BRICS summit in Brasilia that Russia has met its military objectives inside Syria. Putin claimed Russia has liberated Syria from terrorists and returned it to the government. He said the US made little progress in Syria before the arrival of Russian forces. Now in the United States, 2 people have been killed and 7 wounded after a shooter opened fire at a high school in the Northern Californian city of Santa Clarita. More in this report.
Los Angeles Sheriff's Office Captain Kent Wegner said the shooter saved the last bullet for himself with the intention of killing himself on his 16th birthday. Wegner said the entire incident was recorded by closed-circuit cameras.
Detectives have reviewed the video at the scene, which clearly show the subject in the quad withdraw a handgun from his backpack, shoot and wound 5 people, and then shoot himself in the head. There are no other subjects who are outstanding as part of this incident or who took part in this assault.
U.S. Vice President Mike Pence condemned the shooting. He said the President Donald Trump and his administration will remain resolved to bring the scourge of mass shootings to an end.
In this nation, we mourn with those who mourn, and we grieve with those who grieve. And to the families of those who lost loved ones, and to those who are critically injured.
The latest fatal incident in Southern California is similar to many other mass shootings at U.S. schools.
118 Rohingya refugees have been rescued off the southern coast of Bangladesh after their boat sank. In a statement, Bangladesh's Coast Guard says the refugees were attempting to migrate to Malaysia. The Coast Guard said the boat's engine broke down off St. Martin's Island in the Bay of Bengal. To Africa now, where 20 people have been shot dead in central Mali's Fulani village. Government officials say the gunmen were dressed as traditional hunters who came from neighbouring villages. They said a combing operation is underway to arrest the attackers. The attack follows deadly clashes between herders and ethnic Dogon farmers who've long fought over land and resources. 150 people were killed in Fulani village in communal violence earlier this year. Well, as the protest in Hong Kong continues, a man died during clashes between government supporters and protesters. Officials claim the 70-year-old man was hit by a brick thrown by masked protesters. In London, Justice Secretary Theresa Cheng was hurt after being attacked by protesters. China has strongly condemned both incidents and called for a probe. Speaking in Brasilia, China's President Xi Jinping said the one country, two systems mechanism is being challenged. Xi said the restoration of law and order in Hong Kong is urgently needed. He reiterated Beijing's support for Hong Kong's chief executive, Carrie Lam. Well, staying with Hong Kong, and their economy has plunged into its first recession in a decade after months of political unrest and the trade war between China and the United States. Data released by the government today shows the economy shrank by a seasonally adjusted rate of over 3%. The Chinese territory's GDP contracted for a second consecutive quarter, meeting the technical definition of a recession. Hong Kong's economy has been pushed into the doldrums by nosediving tourism and a sharp drop in retail sales and a faltering stock market. Government data shows the economy is now at its weakest since the 2008 global financial crisis.
In the third quarter, this was the first year-on-year decline in more than 10 years. Overall investment expenditure fell stiffly by 16.3%. As economic conditions worsened, the labour market showed some easing in the third quarter. The unemployment rate went up to 2.9%.
Schools and businesses in Italy's Venice remained shut for a third day as the flooded city was hit by a new tide. The iconic St. Mark's Square has also been closed for tourists. The government declared an emergency after the highest water levels in 50 years damaged buildings and homes yesterday. Damage costs are estimated at hundreds of millions of euros. Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte has described the flooding as a blow to the heart of the country. Well, in Serbia, a boom in Chinese tourism to the Balkan state is providing a welcome source of cash to the local economy. A wedding extravaganza in a small picturesque village has been pulling in tourists now for the last 2 years. This report has the details.
Peals of laughter erupted as Chinese tourists were led through a series of rural traditions in Serbia's holiday village of Gostol Jubilej. The women were given traditional white aprons, while men, donned in boat-shaped peasant caps, were cast in wedding roles. The guests were then drawn into a traditional circular kolo dance.
They will also have a chance to understand what kind of wedding is going there, and they can see a lot of the traditional clothes wearing on themselves.
Lured by visa-free travel and low costs in comparison to Western Europe, the Chinese have been coming to Serbia in droves.
I think that they are finally realizing that Serbia and Balkan has something nice to offer and something that is completely different than they already seen.
The growing tourism industry is proving very lucrative for Serbia. Last year it earned 1.5 billion euros, contributing more than 3% to its GDP.
Well, from Chinese tourists to Chinese scientists, as the country has completed a crucial landing test ahead of a historic unmanned mission to Mars in the year 2020. The China National Space Administration says the mission aims to conduct a global and comprehensive exploration of Mars. More on the red planet in this report.
The Mars lander underwent a hovering and obstacle avoidance test at a sprawling site littered with small rocks. The experiment simulated the uneven terrain on Mars and verified the craft's design accuracy.
Today's test verified the procedures, including the lander's separation with the main body of the spacecraft, and then searching for a safe landing spot.
Researchers claim the test was a success. They say the rocket launch system called Long March 5 will take 7 months to reach Mars and 7 minutes to land.
The testing facility comprises 3 parts: a task structure, a servo system, and a Martian surface simulation area.
China is not the only country planning to go to Mars next year. Russia, the US, and the UAE all have their plans to race to the red planet.
South African Airways has cancelled hundreds of domestic and regional flights after its employees staged a strike against job cuts. The organisation has not earned a profit since 2011 and is functioning without a permanent CEO. The company's spokesman said the strike will cost over $3 million to the national carrier. Employee unions said over 3,000 workers and ground staff are taking part in the strike, and they're demanding a raise in their wages.
Where we find ourselves is not the workers' problem. It's management and the board's problem. So why must we pay the brunt? And to say you have no money, you put us in that position.
Qantas Airways has completed a near 20-hour non-stop research flight from London to Sydney. It's testing whether to order planes for the world's longest ever commercial route, where passengers will see 2 sunrises in the journey. More in this report.
The Boeing 787 Dreamliner on the London-Sydney research flight carried 50 passengers. It landed in Sydney almost 100 years after the very first London to Australia flight took 28 days to land in Darwin. The flight crew took care of the lighting, meet schedule and the physical activity of the onboard passengers.
5 times. Inspiration, on your toes.
I actually feel fantastic. I feel really well. Probably a lot better than I normally would at this point in the flight, to be honest.
Scientists were on the plane to monitor passengers' sleep patterns, melatonin levels, and food consumption. Pilots also wore electroencephalograms to monitor alertness and brainwave patterns.
So I think the research data now will go a long way towards making the case for that in how we manage our rest and our well-being, and how we have days off afterwards and before a trip, and also what we do when we're in port as well.
If the experiment goes ahead, the airline will be operating the new service in 2023.
Now in the world of business, Prime Minister Imran Khan says Pakistan's economy has stabilised, with all economic indicators on a positive trajectory. Speaking at a ceremony in Islamabad, Khan said Pakistan's stock markets are on the rise, reflecting a rise in investor confidence in the economy. Meanwhile, Pakistan's Bureau of Statistics has reported that the trade deficit for October fell by over 29% and exports rose by over 6.5%. The Prime Minister said he aims to create millions of jobs for Pakistan's young generation. Khan noted the huge potential to produce hydroelectric power in Pakistan and said a move away from fossil fuels will provide affordable and environmentally friendly energy to Pakistanis. Well, Russia says it's opposing the rolling over of existing oil production quotas agreed with OPEC. Saudi Arabia is expected to push for the rollover when OPEC oil ministers meet their Russian counterparts in Vienna early next month. Speaking at the BRICS summit in Brasilia, President Vladimir Putin said Saudi Arabia has taken a tough stance in oil production talks with Russia. He said this is because of the oncoming flotation of shares in Aramco. Putin said Russia should enhance its cooperation with OPEC beyond oil production. Since January, Russia and OPEC have slowed their output by over 1 million barrels a day to support prices. In July, OPEC and Russia agreed to maintain existing production levels until March 2020. Now in the stock markets, Wall Street stocks have hit record highs at the opening following developments in the US-China trade talks. Strong earnings from semiconductors industries have also lifted the markets. The S&P 500 and Dow Jones indexes have increased. The Nasdaq Composite has gained 0.5%. Chip stocks have also climbed by over 2%. European stock markets are trading mixed after the White House suggested the US and China are close to a trade deal. The CAC 40 in Paris is trading nearly 2% higher after Orange Telecom stocks gained 2.5%. But London's FTSE 100 dropped nearly 0.5%. Frankfurt's DAX index gained a fraction after stock prices for semiconductor manufacturers rose. In Asia, Tokyo's Nikkei 225 index closed over 0.5% higher. The Shanghai Composite lost over 0.5% after China's industrial production in October was lower than expected. Well, it's 21 degrees here in Lahore, but let's take a look at the weather around the world. Well, that's all from me and the team here in Lahore, but don't forget, for the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news. Thank you for watching and bye-bye.